by the insurance companies of their victims, as well as the backup contract partners, the other insurance companies that are in contract with those companies, and those companies' contract partners, and their contract partners, and so on. It would ultimately be every insurance company in America, at least every insurance company that's in the business of rights enforcement. Private armies, essentially.
What if China, instead of doing a
Gets a.
frontal assault, they just say, "Hey,
I
if
didn't
you
get.
work with us,
No.
we will not."
What if I want to hear about
I
the
keep not.
invasion, but keep going.
Let me finish.
Before we get to more, before we get to more what ifs, can I finish my answer to this one?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
it seems like
So,
taxation wasn't
as
able
a-
to finish his thing.
Sorry, I didn't know he hadn't finished.
As a first resort, the insurance companies would defend against the military. And in this context, by the way, the cheapest way, these are profit-seeking firms. They want to minimize costs. The cheapest way for them to deal with the problem would not be to fight the other army head on. It would be to just go kill Xi Jinping, take out the government of China. I actually wrote a little bit about this scenario just for sake of hypothetical in my book. I'm going to read a quick excerpt from my book. To illustrate the contrast between government and the stateless defenses, consider a hypothetical scenario. Suppose the United States government did not exist and President Xi Jinping of China is approached by an ambitious young advisor who's proposing that China invade a stateless America. Jinping contemplates the consequences of disrupting trade with a stateless America, a key supplier to China of crude oil, soybeans, commercial aircraft, LNG, beef, chemicals, medical instruments, electrical machinery, copper, and cars. He envisions of smartphones, machinery, and textiles would cripple its own export-driven economy. Moreover, he recognizes that a stateless America, integral not only to China but to global trade, may attract significant foreign support. Next, Jinping weighs the decentralized nature of America's defense. Without a central authority to target, resistance would persist indefinitely through networks of American companies and militias, draining China's resources over time. Economic sabotage, such as black market trade disrupting supply lines, could exponentially inflate costs. Structural barriers, including the absence of a single elite to co-opt or a symbolic flag to claim, would make conquest elusive. Cultural resistance, amplified by global media, would erode morale, while the lack of high-value targets or ideological threats would render victory strategically hollow. Militias, rooted in local interests, would wage relentless defense. Dispersed guerrilla fighters using urban infrastructure and digital networks would further disrupt operations. Jinping imagines America's last line of defense, a de facto military of hundreds of millions of Americans, armed with machine guns and grenade launchers they bought at Walmart. Most critically, the conflict would not be China versus a stateless America, but a stateless America versus Jinping himself. Insurer-funded bounties would make his personal safety increasingly untenable, transforming the invasion into a high-stakes gamble with catastrophic potential. His own bodyguards could be tempted to profit themselves and their families billions by assassinating him. Recognizing the economic ruin, protracted conflict, and existential peril such a venture would bring, Jinping casts a sidelong glance at his advisor, whose reckless counsel may soon lead him to unemployment.
Okay, dude, but here's the thing. Like,
very well written.
Okay, let me ask a few questions. I mean, one thing is like, don't you imagine that Xi Jinping has the Chinese KGB protecting him 24/7? Like, he has like, I don't know, like what I'm saying.
Wait, sure,
You said the example of some guy like selling him out, but don't you think that the loyalists should be the majority, right? Wouldn't they just like hunt this man down and like torture him for like half a year for that? Like, what I'm saying is like, don't you think there would be massive ramifications at the back of everyone's mind that if you betray, the leader, you would have a terrible fate befell you?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm imagining something along the lines of, American insurance companies tell this guy, look, here's a cyanide pill. We're going to give your family billions of dollars.
No, but here's the thing, like, and I have a question, like, why do you assume that like every American is just going to be this like hardcore Viet Cong guerrilla who's going to wage like 20-year long war?
I don't. It doesn't have to be.
You said it's going to be like this, it's hundreds of millions of militiamen, but like realistically, if like tanks throw into your city, 90% of people are just going to like try to protect their families. They're not just going to even try to fight to resist, right? If they think they're going to die for it. I mean, like that's kind of like in a lot of ways, if you look at like
perfectly fair. I think that's absolutely fair, but it doesn't have to be all or even most America. It doesn't even have to be 5% of Americans. the issue that they would continually face is that some Americans, even if it's only 1%, I tend to think it would be more than that for Americans. But even if it's only 1%, I think that 1% ongoing, which, by the way, with their attacks, that number would grow. The more Americans they kill, the more Americans would be radicalized and mobilized against the Chinese military and the Chinese government. We saw this with in the Middle East when the United States was invading Afghanistan and Iraq. We had this whack-a-mole problem where for every one bomb that we drop and kill one person, 3 more people are radicalized into becoming jihadis. And I think you would have about the same issue with conquest of a stateless, or even not stateless for that matter, America. In fact, very famously, Admiral Yamamoto pointed out of Japan, when the United States was at war with Japan, he said that the reason that they were not even considering an invasion of mainland America was because behind every blade of grass in America is an American with a gun. And in the case of a conquest where you're trying to take over, it's a big problem that you can't just kill everybody, right? Yeah, they have nukes, they have bombs, they could just kill everybody if they really wanted to. But you're trying to take them over, and in that case, it's a big problem for you if you have just scattered guerrillas throughout the population where you don't know who they are. It's not most of them, perhaps. Probably it's not most of
I have
them.
a question.
I'd really like to bring some coherence to
our
this
armies
debate.
used historically for that? It wasn't super effective. I want to ask this question, right? So historically, there was a lot of cases where, for example, if you go like World War II, right? Let's say you had like the sort of like the police units of like the Germans, right, in the occupied territories. They would torture people who resisted as a way of psychologically breaking the population. Do you think that could like what effect do you think that would have if they tried to do that?
I think that it depends. It depends on the disparities of power at hand. If the victim population is far larger than the military, which in this case we're talking about hundreds of millions from the general pool of targeted victim population, not saying they're all fighters, but hundreds of millions of Americans versus a couple million Chinese, my inclination is to believe the psychological effect would be to radicalize and mobilize Americans against that invading force,
Okay,
and not necessarily all of them. Go ahead.
I have my turn. Okay, so what I think and what has happened in the past when it comes to defeating anarchist societies, I think particularly of like the European invasion of Africa. These were, for the large part, anarchical societies, although they were chieftains and whatnot.
I was going to say, I would challenge the premise that these were anarchist societies. They had very rigid political hierarchies. As you pointed out, you had chieftains, often larger scale states. They were disorganized societies, you could say, but they certainly weren't.
So some of them could be described as kind of like proto-feudalists, right? Like they were like Mali, for example, had a more or less like a cemented
the complexities of like African like pre-colonial societies are beyond me. I like, even though there were like chieftains and these things that you would like consider to be very hierarchical, often these chieftains were like ceremonial, or sometimes their power was like secondary to like the village elders, stuff like that. There's far too much nuances, far too many different tribal societies with their own ways of governance to like make like say they were this one thing. But my point stands.
You're absolutely right. Some were stateless, by the way, like the Kushite clans. Absolutely were stateless.
Right. And what prevented them from winning? Right. What the Europeans did is they got these tribes to fight each other. Right. And what I worry is when you argue for this capitalist anarchical society is if they are driven by the profit motive. All Xi Jinping has to do is promise, hey, when I take over, I will not infringe on your profits. I will let you have the profits of your enemy, right? And as long as half of the people agree, not even half of that, whatever they like you would just have to get an amount of people plus your own military. You just have to make it more profitable for half of the population, right? To agree with you than the other. So it's like a very easy tipping point to reach. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah,
I'm
like
sorry.
you're basically
No,
create,
you
you
are
create like you create
you are
like
making sense.
collaborator units in the occupied territories
Yeah.
that you like attack.
Yeah. So
So
suddenly
I
you
think
have this
one
society at
potential
war with
problem.
itself. Yeah.
I think that's a very sound argument. One potential problem with that plan from Xi Jinping's perspective could be that the armies in question are insurance companies, meaning aggression against the persons and property that they insure represents inherent costs for them, and they're in the business of avoiding such costs.
But
Now,
their
I
properties are
guess you could
protected.
make.
Yeah. The agreement is their properties are protected, right? It is, and they will get the properties of the
So
other
wait, in the case that. Very hard to promise. That would be very difficult for Xi Jinping to effectively promise in the midst of a war going on.
I mean, this is even before the war, right? You just go in and you're like, hey, if you take over this territory, I'll pay you, right? If you, and then once you've like destabilized the region enough, I'll come in with arms and with people so you can finish off the rest of the people. This is like the only like the reason why I'm like highlighting this is if you believe that these people purely act off of the profit motive, the most profitable thing, the thing that has the highest expectancy of return on terms of in terms of wealth and in terms of wealth and in terms of like property is to work with the Chinese government. However, if you believe that people are beyond just capitalist thinking through capitalist means, and they actually value, not hurting their fellow man, that they value things like autonomy and their self-governance, then they have reasons beyond just the financial to not attack their countrymen, right? And that's where I think like why guerrilla movements in the world are very difficult to kill, because it's not because they're acting out of their financial best interest, but they're acting out of the human self-interest, their society's best interest.
I think you're absolutely right. I think people clearly do have interests outside of strictly financial self-interest. Financial self-interest, I think, tends to be the most consistent predictor of what people will usually tend to do. But there's absolutely exceptions to this. What you're bringing to mind immediately is the fact that, as far as I'm aware, Oliver Cromwell and his predecessors in the conquest of medieval Ireland and the vanquishing of the Tuatha, which were the private armies of medieval Ireland. As far as I'm aware, the British were not able to get any or many Irish collaborators to join forces with them. And I believe the reason for that, and this is conjectural to some extent, but I believe the reason for that would have been the very fact that anyone who's a collaborator would have been, they might have hang-ups about it out of personal guilt or patriotism or whatever, but also, even if they don't care about any of that, they would have received the utmost of scorn from the communities around them, the utmost of hostility. And sure, even if they could have made a big pile of profit, what's it worth to live in a castle if everybody you know hates you?
But I want to present another thing with Ireland, what would make it different though is because people lived in these sort of they had sort of generational, you could say, memory or whatever, or generational sort of like views of certain things, and the English were seen as like a perennial enemy by that point, right? That they had to fought multiple times with them. I think like you have to account that they had specifically like a lot of hatred for the English, right? Specifically,
Yes.
that, and also Cromwell did represent and another thing is Cromwell was specifically trying to enforce a different form of Christianity, right? That they saw as being heretical, right? Which is another. So I think like there's factors that today would not be that important, because I guess like most people in the West are not, don't necessarily see religion as this like kind of do or die sort of thing that they need to save their faith, right? And another thing is,
Maybe not.
most people have this like generational hatred for any potential invader as well, like the Irish did.
You don't sound American to me. Have you ever visited America?
They're not very religious.
No, I know that Americans do not. Maybe for the West, America is more religious than, say, a lot of like Western Europe and so on. I live in the Bible Belt personally. I'm not religious myself. but my neighbors all are
Well,
Christian. So,
California is, for
but
example, California is one of the most sort of, I think, secular states, right, in America. It's one
But
of the
like
yeah,
most.
the way
California is quite
Christians,
clear.
even in
I
the
was
Bible,
going to
that
say,
most people are Christians. It's not like
the reason I
religious.
asked about visiting America, even if we set aside religion, there is a culture here where if I go down my road, I see 100 American flags. And I cannot picture these people, who, by the way, all have guns, lots of them usually. I cannot picture these people who have a whole lot of American flags and a whole lot of guns being like, oh, yeah, we got to do what the Chinese sergeant says, I just can't pass this.
But here's the thing, like, but
They're
you're kind of
pro-Russian.
describing but you're describing kind of like a red state, aren't you? Because like blue states would probably be a lot less, well, patriotic and armed, right, on average. And like if you look at sort of, again, like in
Well,
this
a
hypothetical,
lot
right,
of dates,
the West Coast would be mostly blue,
a
right?
lot of
If
blue
China
states
got
are
to it.
made blue. A lot of blue states are made blue by major cities. I live in Florida now, but I'm from Baltimore, and Baltimore is generally a blue state, and largely because, it's near Washington, D.C., so you got all those D.C. assholes. And then you have Baltimore. That's where I'm from. Now, blue states usually are blue because of the major cities. And what you find in the major cities, and probably the biggest chunk of blue voters, are black people. Now, I have a hard time imagining that black Americans are going to quickly get on board with, saluting the Chinese.
I agree with that, but I definitely think that your average American, especially red, like pro-American, patriot Americans, would actually be very easy for an external force to collude, get them to collude with them against the interests of their people. I mean, it's literally happening right now. Russia uses propaganda about like anti-queer people, like the Marxist Leninists are corrupting the minds of your children. Therefore, you should oppose democracy. You should oppose the education of your children. It is quite easy for these people to be influenced by outside forces to work against the nation's interest. And on top of that, when we look at like when these people talk about like America and America's greatness, they don't care about the things that make America great, like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the Constitution. These are all things that when you ask about them in the abstract, they'd agree. But then when we see like people protesters protesting the government, or we see like someone literally being shot by the government, instead what do? They justify, they argue that it is within the rights of their governments to suppress the people. So fundamentally, they are not American. They do not hold up the values that would make them resist a foreign occupation and the tyranny of the state.
Personally, at least where I live and in the community around me, what you described does not resonate. That is to say,
Really?
I believe that my neighbors, for instance, would consistently support freedom of speech, consistently support things like the Constitution, and
So they support. Wait, they support like they support like the, I don't know, the lady who got murdered by the police officer. Sorry, not the ICE agent. They support her.
I don't know anything about that story really,
Wait,
and
you
I
didn't hear
haven't
about
talked to my neighbors.
If I'm not
Okay.
mistaken, and if I'm not mistaken, and try not to explode on me, I seen a camera angle where the woman drove into the police officer.
The very grainy one, yeah, right. But like, if you look at like the non-grainy image, it's very clear that she didn't drive into him. So it's like, if you're not able to
This
see
is
this,
Okay. I wanted to go back to the topic of
there would look.
invasion
I'm very
Iraq.
anti-ICE, by the way, and I actually don't have a problem with. Well, you know what? I shouldn't say it on a live stream. I'll put it this way: I'm very anti-ICE, and whatever people might do based on agreement with that, I don't judge them for.
yeah, but I don't
But
see anyone criticizing. Like, I don't see any of these American patriots criticizing the fact that the government is just kidnapping people while being mass. This is fundamentally
Well, except for the AnCaps.
anti.
the thing is, they
that.
brush it off. They brush it off as well. It's not Americans. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
it's
Like the
foreign
Constitution.
illegal.
You can't protect the American citizens if you don't protect the non-American citizens within the state. Because how do you distinguish between the two? This is clearly an encroachment on your rights as an American citizen. Like, you fundamentally do not believe in the Constitution if you do not support, unless you're opposed to these things. Like, you cannot have freedom of expression if you can literally just be taken off the streets instantly with no due process.
I think they have a blind spot.
There's
when
no
it comes
such thing
to
as an illegal immigrant. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I can't speak for Vagabond, but I know at least 3 of us here would not recognize the concept of illegal immigration. It would just be moving.
Okay, but you see my fundamental point, that red Americans do not support the Constitution or the freedoms of other people.
Absolutely
what matters
not.
More to them is their own freedom.
Well, I mean, absolutely not in the sense that they don't care about they don't care about freedom. I agree with you.
If you ask me, right, the red people I know, right? Wait, let me finish.
So far, if Donald Trump declared tomorrow that he's issuing an executive order where the utterance of certain words is now illegal by Americans, they would all turn on him. I believe that.
No, they literally didn't. Donald Trump made it illegal to be anti-Israel. He literally wrote an executive order saying this shit, and no one bats an eye. Literally no. You don't even know about this, I bet.
No, it's because you're not accounting for this.
I don't know. You're correct.
Special friendship they have that goes back over 100 years.
I don't know what executive order you're referencing. I'm myself outspokenly anti-Israel, and I have not received a visit about it as of yet, anyway. It's not to say that whatever order you're referencing doesn't exist. Is this something that applies to just everyday speech, or is this something with like political institutions?
Let me double check the details.
Wait, the taxation.
I would be surprised. I'd be surprised if there's actually an order that's codified as law that says, that if an American just says, the calls for the abolition of the state of Israel or something like that, then they could be jailed for that. That doesn't pass the smell test. What is your question, Vagabond?
So, I have a question about how do you view it? So if you go by medieval Mongolia, before Genghis Khan, and then previously before the Göktürk Empire, right? So you had these basically it's like a steppe, right? Like a wide steppe across Eurasia, and then you had this, or Asia rather, and then you had these. You had no set population places, right? They would always kind of they were nomads, and they had these basically like clan-based sort of system, right? Would you consider that to be anarcho-capitalist?
I don't know nearly enough about it. Co-capitalists have generally not been nomads that I'm aware of, but you might look. Nomads are usually not industrious. We don't think of nomads as being particularly capitalistic. We think of nomads as being, kind of
relationship. They're capital relationships. So they waged war, but war basically, like clan-based warfare. But what they did is they would sell their parts of their herd to each other, right, or parts of the produce from animals to each other, right, as their sort of trade.
Okay. I don't know then. I don't know nearly. I know nothing about the society that you're referencing, other than what you're telling me. I think the fundamental ingredients.
Like hypothetically, just from what I told you, could they be fitting to your description?
You haven't said anything that inherently disqualifies them.
So
there's.
Could you say could you basically say what are the main sort of requirements for a state to be anarcho-capitalist in your opinion?
Well, one of the requirements is there's no state. That's a big part of it. That's the main part of it.
Well, let's say the nation.
Yeah, I know. You just meant a society. You just meant a society. Yeah. I would say that it's kind of found within the word, just parsing the term. Anarcho, meaning it's anarchy. There is no government. Capitalist, I would define that as, you have private property rights, free enterprise, free trade within a system of private property rights. And if you combine those things, you have anarcho-capitalism. And is it possible for primitive nomads to technically qualify? Yes, I think it is. Did they qualify? I don't know.
You said there has to be respect for private property. Now, hypothetically, if you have a society which is stateless, right, but it kind of devolves into a state where a lot of people just kill someone else to take their assets, would that still qualify as anarcho-capitalism?
I think if you do not generally have private property rights and upholding of private property rights, then no, it does not qualify as anarcho-capitalism. So the Hobbesian scenario is not anarcho-capitalism. The purge is not anarcho-capitalism.
But then couldn't you argue that okay, for example, you have a small farm, right, and you have a few guns, right? Would you having guns qualify as your private property rights being upheld? Because you can defend yourself with arms against anyone who...
No, not inherently. You might have guns in the Soviet Union. You might have guns in North Korea somehow. But we certainly wouldn't say that means you live in anarcho-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism describes a general societal condition.
I have a question. So let's say you have an anarcho-capitalist system, right? Let's say
it's
something
cold.
that happens. Let's say you go to some farmstead and you kill the entire family, right? Is there going to be any repercussions to your actions? Because there is no police, right? As I understand.
Of course. Yeah.
Any
no, there are police. It's just not a function of monopoly. If you go kill, let's say you go kill, we don't have to call them police.
So basically, there's additional action bars. I mean, as far as I could tell, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 action bars, but maybe you could download Dominoes. That'll probably help you. Or Shago Tweaks is good.
And or in the event somebody commits a crime against them, then the company will conduct an investigation and seek to prosecute the criminal and exact justice. And they'll sue the criminal.
I understand it's optional to be subscribed to one of these companies, and if you're not, then you don't have any protection.
It's not necessarily true that if you're not, you don't have any protection. It is true that it's optional. Of course, nobody can force you. Nobody should be able to force you. You don't have to. However, if you don't subscribe, then you don't have as strong of a position when you want to exact justice. So one option you have is claim subrogation. That's a system whereby claims to restitution are
This is what do they call it? What is it called?
They prosecute the case. They keep the total, which is say $20,000. So they've profited $10,000. I've received compensation, and you've been prosecuted. That's a way that even without already being subscribed to a rights enforcement firm, you can still get justice after the fact. And in the case of immediate protection, rather than justice, something like you want to have officers come to your location.
Nice damage.
There's a few ways we can imagine that working. One of which is simply you agree to
all the
incur
items
debt
I have
at the time of getting officers to come. That's
I don't have
probably
many.
the most expensive option. Of course, you could pay up front. That might be cheaper in the long run than incurring a debt. But those are both options, as well as whatever charitable efforts. And of course, there's nothing to prevent you from having neighborhood watch type organizations, mutual aid as it applies to the service of protection, whatever other creative solutions people can imagine. So there's nothing to restrict you to only this insurance model. I just think that's most likely.
I'm messing with mods right now to see
common.
What's the best
I have a question.
graphics mod to install.
If I, for example, own land, am I able to do whatever I want with this land?
Within certain parameters, you're not allowed to say.
I was going to ask, can I sell this land to China, to the Chinese government?
Yes, you can sell the land to China. Nobody's stopping you. You cannot.
What prevents
You
China
can't
from
like
buying
enslave
out?
people.
No, but what prevents China from just mass buying assets, for example, in this stateless America, right, to economically conquer them?
Nothing. Nothing. They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to do that now. That's not illegal now. China does sometimes buy assets in America.
No, but I mean, like hypothetically, if they buy significant land in America and then they station their military there, would that be okay for you?
That's allowed, yes. Now, I can't speak for everybody. Some others, especially Americans, might have a problem with that and might do something about it. I don't know. But at least within a libertarian ethical framework and within anarcho-capitalist theory, that is in theory allowed.
Could China just buy? Well, okay. What if China just buys out all the key infrastructure in America, and then they basically control whoever still lives in America has to basically work for them because they control. For example, like what if they control like most of the sort of water sources and stuff like that, like crucial things that everyone needs?
That seems exceptionally difficult, considering we can get water from the sky, and many of the water sources are not property to be sold. For example, Lake Michigan, though that's a big major water source, it doesn't have an owner. And being something that is natural, not the product of man, it would be very difficult for anybody to justify an ownership claim to it. Therefore, there wouldn't really be somebody who can sell it to China. It's kind of like saying
Couldn't you buy like every? Could you like buy every inch of land like around the lake for the next 50 miles, and then you would basically own it because no one would have access to it because they'd have to cross your land illegally, as in Chinese land in this scenario?
It would be exceptionally expensive, but sure, in theory, I mean, people could go over your properties. You know, people could take a seaplane and so on, and various things. But yeah, sure, in theory, I mean, that would be very, very difficult and expensive for somewhere like Lake Michigan, and then all it takes is one property owner who's not willing to sell.
I feel like we've already gone through this hypothetical. Like, I don't feel like it needs to be retread. Because, like, we already agreed that...
Oh, okay, bro, but let me ask you questions.
Okay, then, can you get to the point?
Well, what do you mean, what's the point? I'm just, like, what's the problem here?
We've already gone through this hypothetical. We've agreed that if people act purely out of their financial interest, then a financial takeover is pretty easy in that scenario. However,
I never conceded that it was easy.
Okay, relatively.
I'm not dismiss things as impossible, but maybe. I'm not going to go ahead and say definitely, but maybe.
If people are purely...
It kind of depends what you mean by financial takeover.
Wait. I think it's an interesting topic. What are you bitching about? I mean, like, it's an interesting
No, because we've already come to a conclusion about it. That's why I'm bitching, because I don't want to hear it again. So basically... Wait. You can just... If we have not reached
every
consensus,
property
then
you'd
you can
buy
say
around
you
a
don't
lake
agree
would
with my
increase
next
the cost of the next.
So, taxation.
You could buy.
Do you agree that if people act out of their financial interests, then China could offer a big deal to half of the companies, and then say, we will give you this bonus on top of the land that we conquer if you work with us, and then they would take over the nation.
Oh, you already asked this like 20 minutes ago, the same question.
Exactly. You're literally asking the same question as this. So that's why So that's why I don't see the
if you
point.
were to buy
that's why
one,
I asked you what
the
your
next
point
would
is.
become costlier.
Even from a framework of financial self-interest, the answer is not immediately apparent to me.
It's not feasible in reality.
By half the companies, you mean like half the insurers in America. That's
half
essentially
the military Gestapos.
Well, the militaries would chiefly be insurance companies in this context. But it's not clear to me that it would be in their financial self-interest to accept that.
What?
But I would have to ask that out.
Wait, how would it not be in their self-interest? They're getting bonus money. They're getting bonus the double the assets. They're even getting free firearms, and their only motivation is profit. In this hypothetical,
well, they would also be putting themselves in tremendous financial danger, both in terms of damage to their own direct assets and personnel, as well as damage to their
but it's
to the properties and people.
You have to be insane. if you're thinking purely financially, obviously the best choice is double.
Why doesn't Walmart just go and blow up Target?
Higher chances of winning the fight with the Chinese government than fighting without the Chinese government, and on top of that, what's it called? Take the bonuses the Chinese provide you for beating your opponent. Like you're.
Wait a minute, but if you're not both in the if you're not involved in the China situation, if you're not backing the Chinese government, it's not inherently the case that you are fighting, and fighting is worst case scenario for such like firms. They want to avoid it at all costs. Because the costs of war do not decrease with customers lost, you have a mobilization of customers to cheaper competitors. This puts a firm out of business. They would have to raise prices more and more. So, as customers leave.
Wait, taxation. I have a question for you about the sort of defense.
They would far sooner than getting involved in a full scale war between the U.S. and China, or between, I guess, the stateless America and China. They would much quicker. It would be much cheaper to just take out Xi Jinping.
I have a question for you, right? I've heard this argument. Now he wasn't like an anarchist. There's like a guy. He wasn't an anarcho-capitalist. He was a libertarian, right? He proposed this. It's much.
You can be both. I am.
But he wasn't like an anarchist, right? But he basically like proposed the idea that you have no conventional military anymore, but you have some sort of organization that, for example, they have to manage the nuclear weapons of a country, and this would act as a deterrence against foreign invasion or foreign meddling.
Oh, excuse me.
Are you asking what I think about that ethically, or do I think it's likely?
Well, like, would your like value system oppose that, or?
Yes, I am a libertarian myself, and I have an issue with the use or threat of nuclear weapons simply on the grounds that you cannot only target the bad guys with them. You're also killing a lot of innocent people. I'm not okay with dropping one drop of innocent blood.
No, I mean, like, would you use nukes if you were invaded, or like your community had a nuke?
No. In other words, I don't think defending myself entitles me to mass murder innocent people that are not themselves attacking me. I think it entitles me to kill the attacker.
But I mean, you can just target military installations, though, with nuclear weapons, if it's like an island with only military personnel.
But how many islands like that are there?
Like Guam would be a good example, right? Like Guam has no civilians living there.
Guam, I believe, does have civilians living there.
Does it?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure it does.
I think you're thinking of Okinawa. Okinawa has civilians.
By the way, somewhat recently, I thought of I saw a video where an American was he a congressman or a senator? He's a senator, I think, from Georgia. No, maybe he was a congressman, whatever. An American politician from Georgia. Jesus.
It's not very rude.
Anyway, an American politician from Georgia was presented by a military leader with the prospect. Yeah, thank you.
I got him.
Was presented with the prospect of deploying American forces to Guam. And the politician objected that if we deploy military forces to Guam with tanks and so forth, that it could cause the island of Guam to capsize and flip upside down.
Wait, you mean like physically?
Yes, like the island would become too heavy on the side that the military lands on, and so the island turns upside down and it flips over. This was an actual.
Is that actually physically possible, or is that just like some?
No, of course that's not physically possible. Islands don't flip over if you put weight on them. An island is not just a floating thing. Just sitting on top of the water. It's the top of a land structure that's mostly contained in the ocean.
Yeah.
So, but he didn't know that. There's a video of this I could dig up and send if you're skeptical. It's fucking hilarious. This is an elected politician in America who was worried that if we land forces on Guam, that it'll be too heavy and the island will flip over.
Because if I was thinking like it's some sort of like sand dune thing or whatever, Guam, then maybe that's like. But no, I guess.
No, it's just island. It's just a regular island. It meaning what the guy was saying was every bit as retarded as it sounds. There's not something you're missing. You're not missing something. He's really stupid.
Who was like the woman, like Saki or whatever? Is that like a name, like one of the spokeswomen or whatever? Like she said something about the Belarusian Sea once. That was funny.
I don't know. I'm not sure who you're talking about, Saki.
Jean, PS something. I don't remember. It's Jean something.
Not familiar.
Okay, but basically, like there was like some comment about how it's like the Belarusian Sea or whatever. But
all right. Well, what was it?
Well, that it exists, right? Yeah, Jan Psaki. Yeah, Jan Psaki. I remember now.
Jen Psaki?
Not familiar with
that.
Her.
Was the what she was the spokesperson for like the
Belarus landlocked. That's
for Biden.
Jen Psaki? What about her?
I guess she made a comment about the Belarusian Sea.
The Belarusian Sea being threatened, right?
Yeah, but there's plenty of clips of politicians saying outlandishly stupid things. Where they're the worst about it is with guns. Holy shit! There's like YouTube compilations that are just politicians talking about guns, where it's very obvious immediately if you're remotely familiar with guns that these politicians have like. Not only are they not familiar with guns, they seem to struggle with kind of basic common sense. For example, there was an American politician, I forget her name, but she argued that a single AR-15 weighs about as much as 10 moving boxes. That is, if you're moving things and you've got 10 full boxes of stuff in the process of moving from one home to another, that 10 of those weighs the same as one AR-15 rifle.
It's good for to get gains, right? You just carry that around all day.
Sample text, didn't I see you in a Destiny live stream?
Possibly. I was there a couple of times. Not for like more than 10 minutes.
Interesting.
They say, I've seen politicians say things like that an AR-15 can shoot 1,000 rounds per second.
I think last time I talked to Destiny was like a month and a half ago. Yeah.
There was the guy in California who referred to a 30 caliber, that this rifle shoots a 30 caliber clip. This was in a sequence of ridiculous statements, all jam-packed close to each other. What was it? One of the politicians said something like that. A round from an AR-15 is capable of, what was it? It was like drilling through a crowd of 100 people or something. They assign ridiculous power to it. Heat-seeking bullets and stuff.
Wait, taxation. What's your favorite firearm?
Whatever firearm is in my hand.
Nukes. I like nukes.
My favorite firearm. Okay, can we at least narrow it down to like, is it a long gun or a handgun?
No, like just in general. Do you have anything that you think is like iconic?
I mean, does it have to be one that I have myself owned and fired, or
no? Just... It can just be like something you like appreciate for what it is.
You know what? God, there's so many options. I am a big fan of the AR-15 platform. I've owned an AR-15 myself up until the ATF stole it. It's very versatile and modular. You can, there's a lot of modifications that you can cheaply make to it, and It's reasonable for power. At least in terms of fighting humans, the only problem with it is it does not have the power for a lot of game that you might hunt. It would not be ethical, in my view, for instance, to shoot a deer with an AR-15, even though people do it. I have neighbors that do that, but I don't think that's enough power to humanely dispatch a deer. I'm also a big fan of various 308 platforms, such as I like the M14 style rifle. Of course, there's the classic M1 Grand, and that's both a good combat rifle and a good hunting rifle. Although it is a bit heavy for ongoing hunting with. I like AKs. I've had the pleasure of never owning one, but I've had the pleasure of firing an AK. And it just feels great. It's just the right amount of recoil. And it's a 7.62 by 39 round. It's solid round. I only own one gun now, and that's because the ATF stole all my other guns. The gun that I own now is one that convicted felons are allowed to own. I'm a convicted felon. So the gun that I own is an 1860 Army. It's a black powder percussion revolver. It's a Civil War revolver. Colt came out with it in the year 1860, and that's what I carry around every day in my vest. I have a snub nose version of it that's short, and I can fit it in my vest pocket. I have gun pockets in my vest. So I walk around with a gun from the 1800s. I mean, it's a reproduction of it, but...
Once you get the felony, I get it if you don't want to talk about it.
No, it's fine. I had a bunch of juvenile convictions. As an adult, I'd had them all expunged. I'd had my juvenile record sealed. I went through a rights restoration process with the court. I got a court order plus in writing from 4 different lawyers that I was allowed to own firearms. And at the time of getting the firearms, I was. But then in 2019 in Maryland, they changed the law such that now you have to turn 30 years old before an expunged and sealed juvenile record does not prohibit you. I was only 23. So I was allowed to own guns, but then through no further action of my own, I was unilaterally disqualified from having them. And I don't get a letter about it. There's no knock at the door to simply steal them from me. There's no grandfather clause grandfathering me in. The way I find out about this change in law was from the SWAT team in my living room that had just burst in with flash grenades and battering rams. And they were there not only to steal my guns, but also to arrest me for having them. And I was convicted.
When you turn 30, are they going to give them back to you, or are those guns gone?
No, because now I'm a convicted felon for that. I'm an adult felon now because I had those guns. I was convicted of being a prohibited person in possession of firearms. So now I'm permanently a federal felon in the United States.
Can you try and compute that in court that it was like a special case for you or whatever?
No, because I pled guilty. I was looking down the barrel of 30 years in federal prison, but they offered me only probation if I plead guilty. It was a no-brainer. I had to take the deal because the stakes were too high. That's how they work. That's why the feds have a 93% conviction rate, is because everyone takes the deal. Because if you don't, you're gambling tremendously. They have huge prosecution resources, and I didn't trust a jury. So if I were to do any prison time, I would have lost custody of my son, and it would have been much worse for him. So I kind of just, to make sure I don't lose my son, I accepted a few years of probation and being a felon for life.
Yeah, it sounds pretty shitty, right? What happened?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the government. I mean, it was worse than that, too. I mean, they gave my entire family PTSD. They almost shot my ex-wife. They dragged her outside without letting her put underwear on. They grabbed my 2-year-old son out of his crib and shook him awake. And they just spent hours terrorizing us and taunting us. At one point, the lead agent was making fun of my terrified, crying son. For years after this, my little boy was waking up at 4:30 in the morning every night, which is when they raided the house. He was waking up every night around that time, just having panic attacks and sobbing and wailing or hyperventilating and crying. I mean, they fucked us all up, and then I was looking down the barrel of 30 years in federal prison. So, yeah, I'd say it was pretty fucked up.
Is that what made you kind of become a libertarian, that incident?
No, I'd already been a libertarian for many years prior to this. That's why they came after me. It's because I am a libertarian and an outspoken one. What first drove me down the path of libertarianism was when I was about 9 years old. The government destroyed my parents' business with taxes. Fast forward a couple of years, and when I'm 11 years old, I needed to earn money to help with the bills. And when you're 11, you're not legally allowed to just go work a normal job. So I sold drugs. And over the next few years, I got a taste of the war on drugs, what the effects are of government prohibition of drugs, just constant fucking violence. And that radicalized me. All of those things very much radicalized me against the state. And there's other little one-off stories here and there. You know, when I'm 17, the police beat the shit out of me for about 15 minutes while I'm in handcuffs for exercising a right supposedly protected by the Constitution. Been arrested a whole bunch of times and state-backed, sent to TTI institutions. At one point, I was a slave, ultimately because of the state. I mean, a slave at a ranch, compelled to work against my will under threat of force by the police. So kind of just from the time I was a kid, at every turn, the state has been fucking my life up, always. And it seems to just never stop.
What's your opinion on the Libertarian Party? Like, what's his name? Like Rand Paul, whatever.
Well, Rand Paul is not part of the Libertarian Party. He's part of the Republican Party. Ron Paul, his father, used to be part of the Libertarian Party, and he is a registered Republican, but he's more libertarian than even a lot of people in the Libertarian Party. Certainly the Republican Party. I like the Libertarian Party, generally speaking. They have some successes. I think that they serve more so a role of getting our ideology into the spotlight than anything else. A lot of people in the party see it as a way to win elections and make the change that way. But I think before any of that can happen, we have to have an ideological paradigm shift. And I see the party as an effective catalyst for spreading the ideas. And I really think they should focus on being louder rather than trying to appease masses and water down the message and try to win elections.
So do you vote for them in elections or whatever?
I'm a convicted felon, so I'm not allowed to vote for anybody. But if I could vote, I would vote for the Libertarian Party. Yes. The one time I ever have voted was for Jo Jorgensen, who was the Libertarian presidential nominee, and her running mate Spike Cohen, who's a personal friend of mine.
So, what other things can you not do anymore since you're a convicted felon?
Well, there's a lot of jobs I can't have. That's part of why I'm unemployed right now. I've been having a very hard time getting jobs. I recently failed a background check to work for fucking FedEx as a delivery driver.
Wow.
I can't vote. I can't own guns that fire cartridges anyway. I can own percussion and flintlock guns. I am not allowed to hold certain positions within government. I'm not allowed to... There are certain certifications I cannot have. For instance, I may not be able to get my insurance license again. I used to be an insurance broker.
Can you have a small business open up, or is that forbidden as well?
No, I'm allowed to do that. In fact, I'm working on building a business right now. Well, not right now, as we speak, but I've been working on building a small business. Yeah, that's allowed, and that's always been kind of what I've seen as what I'm going to have to do. And in some cases, what I have done. I used to run a pet care company. What'd you say?
Is this lifelong, the felony, or is it there's
Yes, I'm a federal felon, and there is no expungement of federal felonies. It's lifelong until the government goes away or the law changes. I'm a felon in the United States.
Is there like a thing where you can like in 20 years you can like make some like apology or whatever, and they might remove it? Is there something like that?
No, not with federal felonies. There are civil rights restorations for certain things. Not the things that concern me most, like firearms ownership. In theory, I'm just fucked for life on that one.
Now, hypothetically, if you like marry someone and you're a convicted felon, can they own guns in your place of residence?
Yes.
If you both live there?
Yes, me and my girlfriend have talked about this. Yes. Well, there's a caveat though. The guns have to be locked up in a safe that I don't know the combination to. I'm not allowed to be in construction.
That would be hard to police, though, right? Like the combination.
Yes.
Pretty
I
much
think
impossible,
that would be very hard
to
police. What was I going to say? I'm not allowed to be in constructive possession of a firearm. So let's say me and you are standing in a kitchen, right? And you've got your gun, and you're just showing me your gun. That's allowed. You can hold it up and show me. And then you set the gun down on the counter, and then you go to the bathroom. I'm now committing a felony.
Can I give you the gun to hold while I'm present?
No, I can't even touch it.
I see.
If you were to remove the part that's considered a firearm from the gun, like in the case of an AR-15, if you were to disassemble the AR-15 and remove the lower receiver, but hand me the rest of it, I would be allowed to hold all that. But I can't even touch the lower receiver. Likewise, in the case of a Glock, it would also be the lower receiver. Usually it's the lower receiver that they treat as the firearm.
Wait, do you know that like meme? I own a musket for self-defense.
Yes, tally-ho, lads. I literally do own a Civil War revolver because that's what's legal for me. And I do intend to get, I'm not going to say muskets. I would say percussion rifles. Muskets, usually by definition, muskets are considered smoothbore, where they don't have rifling, and I'm much more interested in rifles that do have rifling, such as, the Kentucky rifle was an early... Not that would be my choice, per se, but that's a common known example of one. The Whitworth rifle, that's another one that's... what for a long time, even after the Civil War, was the longest sniper shot ever landed, was taken with a Whitworth rifle in the Civil War, which was a percussion rifle that fired a weird hexagonal bullet. The bullet was the shape of a hexagon. And instead of conventional rifling, it had a twisted hexagon bore shape. Very interesting.
Yeah,
but it was extraordinary.
Do you know about like primitive air rifles from like the late 18th century? Like, have you heard about that?
The Giordani air rifle is the most famous one.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Lewis and Clark carried that one. And I do own air rifles. Some of the air rifles are getting pretty impressive. There is an air rifle now called the AEA Zeus, which fires a 72 caliber pellet, I guess you'd call it. Well, 72 caliber slug. It's a big hunk of metal, and it fires it at north of 1,000 feet per second, I believe. Actually, I think maybe even faster. And I mean, this is a gun you would absolutely be confident shooting a buffalo with, or an elephant maybe. Now it's only a single shot. You only get one shot at a time. You have to reload after every shot, so it's not the most convenient. But there are other ones that are also very powerful, at least powerful enough to fight humans with, and that are semi-automatic or even fully automatic. the Hatsan Blitz is fully automatic, 30 caliber, and there's a 45 caliber that I'm more interested in that is semi-automatic, made by I can't remember. I always forget the name of this company. It's not AEA.
Armalite.
Even though it looks similar to an AEA thing. But anyway, it shoots like a 45 caliber projectile.
Armalite.
Very fast. What'd you say?
Armalite.
No, it's not Armalite. What? Armalite that's the AR-15.
Well, the thing with like the
Kalashnikov.
The Garandani, isn't like the idea of it is that you could have shot multiple the pellets without reloading between shots. Like there was multiple pellets within like the canister that you were firing from.
Yeah, so you didn't have to reload between each shot. You just had to recock it. So it was a repeater. It wasn't semi-automatic, but it was a repeater. Oh, I was thinking, by the way, of the Bintac T50 Extreme. It's a 50 caliber semi-auto PCP air rifle with 280 foot-pounds of energy. That's very powerful.
All right, guys, I'm gonna head out. Have a good night, guys.
Minus it had was